João, a 38-year-old businessman, was used to the luxury of first-class travel. He frequently traveled the world for work, and every flight seemed like an opportunity for him to feel superior, surrounded by comfort and privileges. His seats were always the best, his meals the most exclusive, and the service impeccable. He saw himself as someone who had earned everything he had, a successful, respected man with great power. It was hard for him to imagine anyone around him having a life as interesting as his. That day the flight was from Sao Paulo to Los Angeles, a long flight of over 10 hours. When João boarded, he settled into his first-class seat and started preparing for another business trip. As the plane began to roll down the runway, he looked around, evaluating the other passengers. Many seemed to be there for leisure, but something caught his attention: the man sitting next to him. The guy had a simple appearance: an old leather jacket, sunglasses even inside the plane, and a worn-out backpack. He wasn't the type of person João expected to find on a first-class flight. With his unassuming style and calm demeanor, he looked more like an ordinary tourist than a public figure. João grimaced. To him, celebrities were always dressed in flashy clothes, wearing designer brands, and never mixed with the common folk. This man was clearly trying to go unnoticed, which João found at least a bit curious. Who could he be? João wondered. But he soon gave up trying to speculate. It was then that the man next to him looked at him and with a discreet smile, said, "Hi, how's it going?" "Good, and you?" João replied, trying to sound cordial but with a slightly cynical tone. "Good too, thank you," the man said, adjusting his sunglasses and turning his attention back to the window, as if he had no hurry to do anything else. The conversation then fell into an awkward silence. João, not liking the type of person sitting next to him, made himself comfortable in his seat and began to do what he most enjoyed during long flights: analyze the other passengers. He watched the man discreetly, as if trying to figure out who he was. To João, it seemed like the man was either there purely by chance or, at best, trying to pass himself off as someone important without really being so. Is he trying to play it cool? João thought, as if the man were using a disguise to hide a secret identity. Unable to contain himself any longer, João, with a sly smile, decided to crack a joke. I know. Let me guess, you're some actor trying to go unnoticed, right?" The man looked at him with a calm expression, then let out a quiet laugh before responding. "Something like that," he said with an enigmatic smile without making a big fuss. And then he returned to his silence. João chuckled, thinking he had just figured something out, but soon went back to his own observations. What he didn't know was that this man sitting next to him, apparently ordinary and unimpressive, was someone he could never have imagined sharing the same plane with. But it wasn't yet the time to uncover the truth. The flight was well underway and time seemed to crawl slowly. João continued watching the man next to him more critically. He tried to hide it, but his gaze kept scanning that stranger, as if he were trying to find something that could justify his presence in that elite space. When the meal was served, the atmosphere in the first-class cabin was calm. The conversations around were quiet and polite. João found himself more and more bored, glancing at the man next to him, who seemed to be in a state of complete indifference, just enjoying the flight with serenity. He seems like one of those types who think they're better than everyone else just because of the way they dress. Leather jacket, worn-out backpack. Why doesn't he invest in something decent? João thought, feeling a little uncomfortable with the situation but unable to stop his internal judgments. So he decided to make another attempt at interaction, trying to break the silence in a more fun way. As if trying to maintain the facade of someone irreverent and witty, João leaned to the side and spoke with a forced smile. "You know, the funniest thing is seeing these kinds of people who try to hide who they are. I bet with that ancient look you must be one of those cool artists trying to go unnoticed." The man next to him, not bothered by the joke, just gave a brief smile and responded with the same calmness as before. "You're mistaken." João, trying to keep the conversation going, laughed and made another sharp observation. "Oh sure. Everyone thinks they're going unnoticed, but the truth is, it's just another strategy to get attention. I mean, if you were famous, you wouldn't be sitting here looking like that, right? I bet you're trying to play the normal guy role. It's so cliché." The man laughed softly but didn't really care about João's tone. He just said, "You know, there's something more interesting than trying to guess or get things wrong about others. Trying to understand the real reason behind people's behavior." João, ignoring the depth of the response, decided to continue his game of celebrity guessing. I get it. So you're saying it's more interesting to look like you're losing the fight against fame? That's hilarious. Seriously, anyone who's famous and travels first class is bound to stand out, even if they try to hide it." But the truth is, in the end, no matter how much you try to hide, there's always someone like me who'll notice. The other passengers around were starting to notice the conversation, and some cast furtive glances at João and his neighbor. But he, wrapped up in his own critique, didn't notice the change in atmosphere. He felt like he was winning a battle of words, and that the man next to him was just playing the role of someone who didn't understand the rules of the game. I don't know if you've noticed, but all this humility looks more like a show than anything else. As if, deep down, the people who don't want to be noticed are the ones who actually crave attention the most. The silence in the cabin grew thicker. The man next to him didn't respond immediately. He simply stared out the window for a long moment, as if pondering something far beyond João's words. For a moment, João felt a slight discomfort. But his arrogance didn't let him question the situation. After all, who was this guy to talk about humility? He wasn't on João's level. It was then that the flight attendant came by offering more drinks. João ordered a glass of whiskey and after taking a sip, turned back to the man next to him, once again trying to continue the conversation. I've always found it funny how people think they're so special. Like they're above everyone else just because they can maintain this facade of humility. That's what celebrities are after, right? A false sense of modesty, just to seem more approachable. If you're really famous, show it. Don't try to pretend you're nothing. The man next to him paused for a long moment before responding. When he spoke, his voice was calm, almost gentle. I don't know, João. Maybe what you call a humility facade is just a choice. Sometimes we don't need a stage to be who we are. João, increasingly convinced he was dealing with someone who didn't understand the game, smiled, maintaining a sarcastic tone. You can try to convince me of that, but man, everyone knows that humility is just another marketing trick. It has nothing to do with being genuine. Humility is just a facade people put on to sell themselves better. They call it to appeal to the masses. And no matter how much you try to hide it, anyone famous doesn't stay invisible for long. Someone will always notice. The man looked directly at him, still wearing his sunglasses, but now with an expression João couldn't quite understand. It wasn't anger nor impatience. It was more as if he was simply observing João without rushing to react. Finally, the man stood up gently, looked at João, and with a subtle smile said, I'll step away for a moment. It seems my colleague needs more space to understand what really matters. João felt in some way offended. He still didn't know what was going on, but something in the man's reaction made him feel uncomfortable. He felt a slight chill but didn't pay much attention to it. As the man walked away to the bathroom, João looked around. Some passengers were still watching from a distance, and one even murmured something to their neighbor. João didn't know what they were talking about, but he felt that something was off. He didn't understand why so much attention was being directed at him, but he quickly forgot about it. His focus was on maintaining his unbeatable view of the world. Time passed, and the flight felt more and more distant from his everyday reality. João reflected on how he had always felt that people, especially celebrities, were so predictable, so easily manipulated. And yet, something in the man's words and behavior was bothering him. He didn't know it yet, but this flight was about to take an unexpected turn. Time on the flight seemed to slow down. João was increasingly absorbed in his own thoughts, as if his confrontation with the man next to him had sharpened something inside him. He had always believed that he could read people like an open book, and the man's behavior bothered him because it didn't fit the patterns he knew. The fact that the man, with all his apparent humility, hadn't retaliated against João's jokes more aggressively, like João imagined any celebrity would, left him unsettled. When the man returned from the bathroom, João was sitting in his seat, sipping more whiskey, trying to act like he didn't care about what had just happened. But for some reason he couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. The man sat back down beside him without saying a word. João looked at him, searching for some response, some sign of provocation, but the man seemed absorbed in his own thoughts, or perhaps in the comforting silence of the flight. This, in a way, increased João's frustration as he was determined to maintain his sense of superiority. The flight continued at its pace, and the conversation between the two seemed non-existent. But something was about to break that awkward silence. The man, with a calm gesture, removed his sunglasses and looked directly at João. Do you really believe that everything I do is to make an impression? He asked in a calm tone, but with a slight smile. João was surprised, not by being confronted again, but by how the man seemed completely at ease. The last thing he imagined was that someone would be able to face him with such serenity, as if all of his criticism wasn't even remotely relevant. The fact that the man had mentioned making an impression made João feel, in some way, touched. He tried to maintain his composure, but curiosity began to take over him. I just think it's all a game, you know? All this attempt to be simple, to try to pass for someone ordinary. Deep down, it's just a disguised way to get noticed. Celebrities like you know exactly how to manipulate that image, João replied, now with a more pointed tone. He was determined to challenge the view that was bothering him. He leaned back in his seat and looked at the man, waiting for some reaction. The man didn't seem disturbed. He remained silent for a few seconds, studying João with an almost unattainable tranquility. Then he began to speak, very calmly, almost as if he were sharing a philosophy of life with someone who would never understand. No, João. Maybe that's how you see the world. But you're wrong about what it means to be genuine. I don't strive to be noticed, nor do I do it to appear as you think I do. In fact, I don't care about other people's opinions. I am who I am, and that doesn't need to be proven. João felt a growing discomfort. The man's words seemed to reverberate in his mind, but he didn't want to admit that he was being affected. This was messing with his worldview, with the way he saw people and the very concept of fame. He had always had immense control over how things happened around him, but in that moment he felt a strange loss of control. So, what are you trying to say? That you're here, sitting next to me, not wanting any of this? No attention, no recognition? That doesn't make sense. Every famous person loves being recognized, João replied, still with the same cynical attitude, trying to convince himself that he was still in control of the situation. The man took a deep breath, calmly, and once again looked at João with serene eyes. I don't seek recognition. I seek peace. Recognition doesn't bring happiness, João. In fact, it often brings more complications than joy. The words kept echoing in João's head. He felt like something was being deconstructed inside him, but he wasn't ready to accept it. He had always seen fame as something grand, as a mark of success and superiority. The idea that someone as famous as the man sitting next to him could be so distant from the pursuit of recognition was something João didn't know how to handle. You don't care what people think? João asked, not really knowing what else to say. He felt disconcerted, unsure of how to continue the conversation. The man smiled lightly and with an unshakable calmness replied, No, I don't care. If you think about it, the need for external approval is a prison. I chose to free myself from it. João, though still skeptical, began to reflect on the man's words. There was some truth in it, but he didn't want to admit it. After all, what would his life be if he started rethinking everything he believed to be true? He was a businessman, a person with power and influence. His worth was tied to what he achieved, to what he showed others. If he stopped believing in that, what would be left? The flight continued on its course. João was torn between doubt and resistance. He looked once again at the man next to him, now more thoughtful than ever. He felt challenged but didn't know how to deal with this feeling of vulnerability. It was then that the flight attendant announced the approaching destination. The plane began to slow down, and the first-class cabin prepared for landing. The sound of the attendant's voice interrupted the tense silence between João and the man, but it didn't dissipate the growing discomfort João was feeling. The man stood calmly to prepare for arrival. He looked at João one last time, and this time, his gaze was more penetrating, as if he was waiting for João to finally see something he hadn't yet understood. You'll get the chance to understand sooner or later. And when that moment comes, I hope you'll know how to handle it, he said, with a lightness that made João feel as though something much larger was unfolding around him. João wanted to respond, but the words seemed stuck in his throat. Those words, the man's tranquil presence, all of it was stirring him in a way he couldn't process. The plane touched down, and the sound of the wheels on the runway brought João back to reality. He felt the weight of the moment, but still didn't know how to interpret everything that had happened. As the plane slowed down, he looked once more at the man beside him, and this time, their eyes met for a brief second. Before João could say anything, the man had already moved away, disappearing among the other passengers standing to retrieve their luggage. João remained there, still, staring into the void, feeling as though something inside him had changed, but not knowing exactly what. The landing had been the turning point, but he still didn't know the real impact it would have on his life. The plane finally landed in Los Angeles, and the pressure João felt seemed to slightly ease with the frantic movement of disembarking. He stood up from his seat, trying to recover from the emotional discomfort he had experienced during the flight. But one thing was clear in his mind: he still couldn't fully understand what had occurred. As the passengers began to exit, João made an effort to stay focused on his work. He thought about the meetings he would have, the negotiations ahead. But a persistent feeling of discomfort lingered. The conversation with the man next to him kept hammering in his head. No matter how hard he tried to push the words of that stranger away, They were deeply etched in his mind. "I chose to free myself from it," the man had said. "The need for external approval is a prison." Those words, spoken with almost zen-like calmness, seemed to echo in his mind. João felt a mix of anger and admiration. How could someone be so at peace with themselves, not caring about what others thought? He, who had spent his whole life accumulating power and recognition, felt that something inside him had been questioned in a way he wasn't ready to deal with. It was when he was picking up his luggage from the conveyor belt, trying to regain his composure, that he heard a familiar voice calling his name. "João, don't you recognize me?" He looked quickly in the direction of the voice and froze for a moment. The man from first class was standing there just a few feet away. Now, without the sunglasses and with a more relaxed expression, he looked even more familiar. And to João, that only made the situation more strange. You're Keanu Reeves, aren't you?" João asked, almost not believing it. He never imagined that the man sitting next to him was someone so famous. Keanu, with a subtle smile, nodded. "Yes, it's me." The revelation hit João like a punch to the stomach. He went pale. Everything he had said, all the jokes he had made about the man trying to hide and pass as an ordinary person, now seemed stupid and cruel. He had insulted Keanu Reeves without even knowing it. Without even realizing that he was sitting next to one of Hollywood's most humble and respected figures. Time seemed to stop for a moment. João didn't know what to say, as if his words had disappeared. He opened his mouth, trying to find something even remotely appropriate, but the apology seemed too small. "Keanu, I didn't know you were. I'm so sorry. I really am." "I don't know what to say," João stammered, his words stumbling over each other as shame washed over him. Keanu simply smiled with a calm look. "Don't worry, João. I wasn't offended." But despite his kind words, João couldn't shake the feeling that he had done something irreparable. He, who had always felt in control of everything, now found himself in a situation where his arrogance and judgments had been completely exposed. I was just joking, you know?" João continued, trying to justify himself. "I didn't mean to offend you. I just thought you were, I don't know, just an ordinary person." Keanu took a step forward as if evaluating the situation. "Sometimes we judge people by their appearance, João. It's easy to do that. But in the end, what really matters isn't appearance or fame. What matters is how we treat others." João felt a slight pain in his chest, as if Keanu's words had pierced him. He felt the weight of his ignorance. He had spent so much of his life trying to be someone important, someone outstanding, that he hadn't even noticed how he was ignoring the true essence of the people around him. "I was insensitive," João admitted in a more serious tone, finally looking Keanu in the eye. "I judged you and I shouldn't have done that. I didn't know I was speaking to someone so important, but that's no excuse. I need some time to process this." Keanu, without losing his characteristic calmness, simply nodded. "I think everyone goes through these moments, João. What matters is learning from them. We only grow when we start seeing beyond appearances." João stood in silence for a few seconds, trying to absorb the actor's words. He was used to being the center of attention, to being recognized and revered, but he had never considered what it would be like to be treated as an ordinary person without the masks of fame. "You're an example to all of us, Keanu," João said now sincerely. "I didn't know that, but you're really different." Keanu smiled once again with that serene smile. "I'm nothing more than someone trying to live the best way possible. I'm not perfect, João. And no one is. We're all just here to learn and grow." Before parting ways, Keanu gave him one last piece of advice. "Whenever you feel like judging someone, remember, you don't know that person's story. And more importantly, you don't fully know your own story. We're all in process." João watched Keanu walk away, feeling a humility he had never experienced before. He knew that conversation would change his life forever. What he had believed to be a simple business trip was now becoming a journey of self-discovery. As he walked toward the airport exit, João felt a weight on his shoulders. But it wasn't a weight of frustration or anger. It was a weight of change. He knew that somehow, his perception of himself and the world had shifted. He wouldn't be the same man who had boarded that flight. And though the future was uncertain, João now knew that the path ahead would be different. More humble, more attentive to people, more willing to listen than to judge. What had started as an attempt to mock a stranger had turned into a life lesson he would never forget. And with this revelation, João felt he was finally starting to understand what really mattered. Not recognition, not fame, but how we treat one another, with respect, empathy, and above all, humanity. 6 months had passed since his encounter with Keanu on the flight to Los Angeles. João now looked back and felt a mix of shame and gratitude. That moment had been a turning point in his life. Something inside him had changed forever. The quick judgments, the arrogance, the desire to show superiority, they all seemed so empty now. But the hardest part for him was admitting that to himself. He was still learning, still in the process. João had tried to apply the lessons he learned from Keanu to his daily life. He sought to be more present, more attentive to others, more willing to listen. His work was still important to him, but he began to realize that human relationships and genuine connections were worth much more than professional success and material accomplishments. However, there was something in his heart that still troubled him. The desire to truly apologize to Keanu, to show him that he had really learned from that encounter. Then one afternoon, while João was in a business meeting, he received an unexpected call. The voice on the other end was familiar, but he couldn't immediately place it. "João? It's Keanu?" João choked in surprise. "Keanu? You're calling me?" "Yes," Keanu replied with his usual calmness. "I wanted to talk for a bit. I was thinking about how you've been. I know that meeting was a bit intense and I wanted to see how you're doing." João felt his heart race. It was surreal to think that Keanu, someone with such a public and busy life, was calling just to check on him. I really don't know how to thank you for caring," João said, now feeling immense gratitude. I never imagined that such a simple encounter, such a small gesture, could change my life so much." Keanu chuckled softly. "Sometimes, the simplest things are the ones that teach us the most. I wanted you to know that what you said at the airport, your sincerity, I could really tell you were in a process of reflection. That's rare, João. And it's something I admire." João felt his eyes well up. It was as if an emotional burden he hadn't known he was carrying was finally being lifted. I just want to apologize, Keanu. I was horrible to you on that flight. I was insensitive and I didn't deserve your patience. In fact, I'm grateful you didn't react the way I did. You showed me what really matters." Keanu once again responded calmly. "I never thought you were a bad person, João. Just someone who was trapped in a way of seeing the world that, unfortunately, wasn't healthy. But as I said that day, we're all in process. And sometimes, the biggest challenge is allowing yourself to change." "I understand that now," João replied, his voice cracking. "I'm trying to be a better person, Keanu. I promise. But I know words aren't enough. I want to show with actions how much I've learned from all this." Keanu, with his calm and compassionate voice, said, "I don't need you to show me anything, João. What's most important is what you're going to do for yourself. When change is real, it shows in your actions, in your daily behavior. Don't pressure yourself, just keep going. And remember that true peace comes from within." They talked for a few more minutes, but deep down, João knew this was the moment his life was beginning to take a new direction. Something inside him had been strengthened, something deeper that he could no longer ignore. When the call ended, Keanu said goodbye with simple words, but they would continue to resonate in João's mind for a long time. "Good luck, João. No matter how difficult it gets, there's always a second chance to do good. And remember, humility isn't a virtue you practice only with others. It also has to be with yourself." The call ended and João stood there holding the phone, feeling as if he had just received a blessing. He looked out the window of his office, seeing the city pulsing outside. He no longer felt like the same man as before. And deep down he knew that from this moment on, the real change in his life was happening. In the days that followed, João began to approach his work differently. He started seeing his colleagues and employees in a more human way. Instead of viewing relationships merely as transactions, he began to cultivate a genuine interest in the people he interacted with. He listened more than he spoke, practiced more empathy than criticism. He was learning to be more present and focus on what truly mattered. At the same time, he still felt the weight of his past. The idea of reconciling with everyone he had wronged, directly or indirectly, seemed like a long and ongoing process. But the change itself was already underway. He no longer had the same sense of superiority that once dominated him. Each day was a small step toward becoming the best version of himself. A month later, João received an unexpected letter. It was addressed to him, but there was no return address. When he opened it, what he found made him smile with a lightness he hadn't experienced in a long time. It was a handwritten letter with a simple yet profound message. "João, know that we all have something to learn. No matter how far you may have strayed from yourself, there's always time to return. Keep going on your path. Change begins with the courage to admit where we've gone wrong. Thank you for your words and for your transformation. I'm rooting for you." It was a letter from Keanu. Simple but with a sincerity that touched João deeply. In that moment he realized that despite everything he had achieved, Nothing in the world was worth more than inner peace and a genuine connection with others. He knew he had a long way to go, but he was more determined than ever to be a better person. And while he couldn't go back, he knew the future would now be much more promising than any success he might have achieved in the past. João's journey was at last just beginning. The months that followed brought profound and significant changes to João's life. It felt as if a layer of arrogance had been removed from his skin, and the world around him seemed clearer, more genuine. His perspective on people, on work, on success, it was all being reconfigured. But the greatest transformation of all didn't come from the outside, it came from within himself. He was learning to be humble not only with others but also with himself. Although João was still a person of great influence in the corporate world, he began to adopt a much lighter and more introspective approach. He was promoted to a new way of seeing business, focusing on the human value of relationships and the positive impact his leadership could have. He now understood that true success wasn't just based on financial profit, but on the legacy he could leave behind. Despite all these advancements, João knew his true mission was not yet complete. He still felt the need to make amends for past mistakes, to finally express his gratitude to Keanu for the lesson he had provided. That encounter on the flight, the moment that seemed so small, had actually been the turning point for his new life. He needed to thank Keanu in a way that was sincere and meaningful. Then, one sunny Sunday afternoon while he was in a work meeting, his phone vibrated. It was a text message from an unknown number. When João opened the message, his heart raced. The text read, "João, I'd like to invite you to an event I'm organizing here in Los Angeles. It's not a big public event, but it would be a great opportunity for us to chat some more, and perhaps even reflect on our conversation during the flight. Let me know if you can make it. Keanu." João felt a mix of anxiety and gratitude. He had been waiting for an opportunity to reconnect with Keanu, but never imagined it would come this way. In a moment, he packed his bags and planned his trip to Los Angeles. He was determined to take advantage of this chance to express all the gratitude he felt. More than that, he wanted to repay the help Keanu had given him without asking for anything in return. When he arrived at the event, João realized it wasn't a luxurious gala or a high-profile event. It was a small, intimate gathering with some influential people from the film and art industries, a relaxed and welcoming atmosphere. Keanu was there talking to a few people, but when he saw João arrive, his calm smile lit up. "You came?" Keanu said, extending his hand to greet him. "I knew you would come. How has your journey been?" João smiled and shook his hand. "I can't even begin to tell you how much this means to me, Keanu. That conversation changed everything. I feel like my life has been different since that flight. I'm a different person, more genuine, more at peace." Keanu watched him for a moment and with a serene expression, said, "I knew you were on the right path, João. True change happens when we allow ourselves to see life from a new angle. You just needed to take that first step. And you did." They spent the afternoon talking about their personal journeys, reflecting on how life often leads us to unexpected places and teaches us lessons we never imagined. João was no longer interested in showing off or seeking recognition. He was slowly learning to see himself in a more honest and authentic way. Every word from Keanu felt like an echo of wisdom, and João felt like he was finally on the right path. The event ended with a small gathering of thanks and discussions about art, life, and the positive impact everyone was striving to create in their respective fields. Keanu approached João once more with a look of sincere appreciation. "You're on your path, João," Keanu said, looking him in the eyes. "And the most beautiful thing is that you're doing it for yourself, not for others' approval. When we learn to follow this path, things start to fall into place in ways we can't imagine. You will leave a legacy not for who you are, but for what you share with others." João was speechless for a moment, feeling the weight and beauty of those words. He had never thought about leaving a legacy in such a pure and simple way. He no longer wanted to be remembered for his wealth or power, but for how he treated others and how he helped inspire people to be better. More than any public recognition, he now knew that the true legacy was in touching lives in a genuine and profound way. That night, as he walked through the streets of Los Angeles, João felt an inner peace he had never experienced before. He knew that life, just like him, was in constant transformation. It wasn't about having all the answers, but about being open to learning, growing, and making a difference, not just in the corporate world but in the human world as well. The trip to Los Angeles was a milestone, not just because of the meeting with Keanu, but because it confirmed everything he had been feeling. He was finally at peace with himself. What once seemed like a simple first-class flight now represented the beginning of a journey of self-discovery he never thought possible. He then realized that true change wasn't about what he achieved, but about who he was becoming. And so, with a smile of gratitude on his face, João continued his journey, knowing that at some point, he would have the chance to touch someone else's life the same way Keanu had touched his. Because, in the end, that's what truly matters: the small changes we make within ourselves and how they impact those around us. João's legacy wouldn't be defined by fame or power. It would be defined by humility, by the ability to learn, and most importantly, by the way he chose to treat others. And this, he knew, would be the greatest gift he could leave to the world.